For more than 2 centuries, the story of the Illuminati has usually ended in the same place. A secret society was founded in Bavaria in 1776. The government discovered it. The order was banned in 1785. Its founder fled. The organization collapsed, and everything that came later, the French Revolution, the warnings about hidden elites, the eye above the pyramid, the claims that the group never truly disappeared, belonged to the world of conspiracy theory rather than history. It is a clean ending, perhaps too clean, because in April of 2026, researchers at the University of Erfurt in Germany announced something that quietly changed one of the most repeated facts in the entire story. According to their work with surviving Illuminati records, the order did not simply vanish when Bavaria prohibited it in 1785. Activity continued for roughly 2 more years. Its final center was not in Bavaria at all, but in Thuringia, around the court city of Gotha. The historical Illuminati, the researchers concluded, were still operating in 1787. That does not prove that the Illuminati survived into the modern world. It does not prove that they caused a revolution, designed the symbols on American money, or created an invisible government behind governments. The surviving evidence points in a much more limited direction, but it creates a better question. If the story we have repeated for generations was already too simple about the first 2 years after the ban, what exactly happened when the real Illuminati disappeared? And why did a society that existed for little more than a decade become more powerful in the imagination after it was gone than it had ever been while it was alive? To understand that, we have to begin with something modern conspiracy culture often makes strangely difficult to remember. The Illuminati were real, not metaphorically, not as a name for billionaires, celebrities, intelligence agencies, central banks, or anyone photographed making a triangle with their hands. There was an actual organization. It had members, rules, ranks, pseudonyms, correspondence, internal disputes, recruitment systems, and political enemies. Some of its documents survived. Some were confiscated by the government. Some were printed in the 18th century. Others remained hidden in archives for generations, and the real organization was in some ways less spectacular than the legend, but in other ways more interesting. Adam Weishaupt was born in Ingolstadt in 1748. He became a professor of canon law at the university there, in a part of Europe where religious authority, dynastic government, and the intellectual changes of the Enlightenment were colliding with increasing force. Weishaupt had been educated in a Jesuit environment, but he became deeply attracted to Enlightenment ideas: reason, moral education, criticism of superstition, and the belief that human institutions could be redesigned rather than simply inherited. On May 1st, 1776, he created a small secret association with several young followers. The earliest members called themselves perfectibilists before the organization developed into what became known as the Order of the Illuminati. There was no global command center, no black marble chamber beneath a bank, no all-seeing eye hanging over the table. At first, it was closer to an ambitious intellectual society organized around discipline, education, secrecy, and reform. But Weishaupt did not want only a reading club. That distinction matters. The surviving record shows that the order was built around the idea that carefully selected people could be educated, observed, promoted through levels of initiation and eventually placed where they could exert influence. The modern Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich describes the order's ultimate goal in unusually direct terms: to develop an elite body of men who could eventually occupy key positions in the state and weaken the political dominance of the territorial princes. That is not a theory written 200 years later. It is part of the historical problem itself. The real Illuminati were interested in influence. Their methods were also deliberately concealed. Members received classical pseudonyms. Weishaupt became Spartacus. Adolf von Knigge, who would later transform the organization, became Philo. Cities and regions could be given coded names. Members did not necessarily know the full identity of those above them. Reports could move upward through the hierarchy. Advancement depended in part on observation, instruction, and the judgment of superiors. In the surviving internal culture of the order, secrecy was not decoration, it was architecture. The Gotha material makes that architecture unusually visible. Members were expected to report upward about their intellectual progress and observations. Some communications moved through channels known as quibus licet, while replies and guidance could come back from superiors under collective or concealed identities. The point was not simply to hide the order from police. It was also to create different levels of knowledge inside the organization itself. A novice could participate without knowing the full structure. A superior could evaluate a member who did not fully know who was evaluating him. Education and surveillance were woven together. That sounds dramatic when described from the outside, but it also reflects a very 18th century faith in disciplined moral formation. Weishaupt believed people could be improved by careful instruction, self-examination, reading, and the pressure of a structured community. The same system that later critics described as manipulation could be described by members as education. Both readings begin with the same mechanism. What changes is the interpretation. This is one reason the later mythology became so difficult to kill. When critics accused the Illuminati of operating through hidden influence, they were not inventing the fact that the order believed in hidden organization. The exaggeration came later, when a real method used by a limited 18th century society was expanded into an explanation for almost everything that happened afterward. The distinction is subtle, but essential. The order grew slowly at first. Then Adolf von Knigge entered the picture. Knigge was a German writer, nobleman, and experienced Freemason. After joining the Illuminati around 1780, he helped reorganize its degrees, improve its recruitment, and connect the order with wider Masonic networks. That relationship has created confusion ever since. The Illuminati were not simply another name for Freemasonry, and Freemasonry was not a unified machine controlled by the Illuminati. But Illuminati organizers did recruit among Masons, participated in Masonic circles, and saw existing lodges as useful social networks through which their own project could expand. Under Knigge, expansion accelerated dramatically. The order attracted civil servants, lawyers, professors, physicians, nobles, clergymen, writers, and other educated men. Current historical databases identify well over 1,000 individuals associated with it, although estimates of total membership vary, depending on what counts as a confirmed or active member. The network remained concentrated mainly in German-speaking Europe. It never resembled the planetary organization imagined later. Yet, its membership included people whose names did not disappear with the order. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe became a member. Duke Ernst II of Saxe-Gotha, Altenburg, joined. Maximilian von Montgelas, a young Bavarian official who would later become one of the most important statesmen in modern Bavarian history, was associated with the order. Johann Joachim Christoph Bode, translator, publisher, Freemason, and intellectual organizer, would eventually become crucial to the Illuminati's final phase. That list should be handled carefully. Membership did not mean that every man shared Weishaupt's complete program, understood every level of the order, remained active for the same length of time, or later followed instructions from a hidden leadership. Secret societies often attract people for different reasons: intellectual curiosity, social connection, political reform, personal advancement, fashion, friendship, or simple fascination with secrecy itself. Even while the Illuminati were expanding, they were already breaking apart internally. Weishaupt and Nigg began fighting over control, methods, and the direction of the organization. Nigg had helped turn a small Bavarian network into something far more sophisticated, but the relationship between the two men deteriorated. By 1784, Nigg had left. That same year, the political environment around the order changed sharply. Bavaria was ruled by Elector Karl Theodor, whose government became increasingly suspicious of unauthorized associations. In June 1784, an edict prohibited secret societies that had not received official approval. The Illuminati were not initially the only target, but information from former members and critics brought the order into clearer view, and in March 1785 a second decree explicitly targeted the Illuminati and Freemasons. For Weishaupt, the consequences were immediate. He lost his university position and fled Ingolstadt. Eventually, he found protection in Gotha under Duke Ernst II, who was himself connected to the Illuminati. This is where the standard version of the story normally fades to black. The founder runs, the government wins, the Illuminati end. But the historical record did not stop producing documents in 1785. Bavarian authorities continued investigating. In October 1786, searches of properties connected to important members uncovered letters, membership information, organizational material, codes, plans, and private writings. Further papers were seized elsewhere. In 1787, the Bavarian government published collections of confiscated Illuminati documents. This produced one of the strangest reversals in the history of secrecy. A government trying to destroy a secret society helped make its secrets public. For the first time, readers who had never been anywhere near an Illuminati meeting could examine material presented as the order's own words. They could see pseudonyms. They could see hierarchy. They could see recruitment plans. They could see discussions of religion, education, political authority, and the manipulation of social influence. They could also see unfinished ideas, private speculation, controversial proposals, and writings that critics presented in the darkest possible light. The order became easier to fear precisely because the government had exposed it. There was another problem. Private papers are not written for future historians. They contain unfinished ideas, exaggerations, personal frustrations, speculative proposals, and discussions that may never become policy. Once such material is seized and published by an enemy, the reader has to answer a difficult question. Is this a blueprint, a fantasy, a discarded suggestion, or the opinion of one member? The 18th century public did not receive the archive with neutral footnotes explaining those distinctions. It received documents inside a political prosecution. Former members complained that the publications distorted context and arrangement. The Bavarian government, meanwhile, believed the documents demonstrated a real danger. Both facts can be true at once. The papers were authentic enough to expose the order, and their publication could still encourage readers to interpret every alarming sentence as an operational plan. And once the documents entered public circulation, they could no longer be controlled by either side. Weishaupt wrote defenses of himself and the order. Former members argued about what the organization had really intended. Critics selected the most alarming passages. Supporters accused the government of publishing material without proper context. The result was not clarity. It was an information war in print. That alone would have been enough to create a long afterlife. But while Bavaria was exposing the order had not yet completely stopped operating. This is the point that became significantly clearer with the recent work in Gotha. For many years, 1785 was treated as the natural endpoint, because that was when the Bavarian prohibition forced Weishaupt out and broke the network in its birthplace. Researchers at the Gotha Research Center now emphasize that the later history looked different outside Bavaria. In Thuringia, under the organizational leadership of Johann Joachim Christoph Bode, and within a social environment protected in part by Duke Ernst II, Illuminati activity continued. Gotha became the last major stronghold. That detail changes how we should picture the final years. The Illuminati did not survive by becoming a perfectly invisible organization with no trace. They survived because political geography mattered. Bavaria could outlaw a society inside Bavaria. It could punish Bavarian officials, search Bavarian properties, and remove Weishaupt from his university. But the Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of territories with different rulers, courts, laws, and intellectual climates. Crossing a political border could change what was possible. In Gotha, Duke Ernst II offered a much friendlier environment. Bode could continue organizing within a web of intellectual and Masonic relationships that had not been dismantled by the Bavarian police. This was not a global underground government. It was something more ordinary and therefore more believable, a network adapting to uneven political pressure. The order's center of gravity moved because one territory became hostile while another remained protective. The evidence for this is especially interesting because it comes from an archive with a history almost as unusual as the order itself. After Bode's death in 1793, materials connected to his Illuminati activity were preserved and eventually became part of a collection later known by researchers as the Swedish Chest. It contained correspondence, Masonic materials, Illuminati records, and a body of internal essays from the order's Thuringian circles. The archive passed through a complicated history, was thought lost after the Second World War, and was rediscovered in the late 1980s. Researchers in Gotha have since been working through this material in much greater detail. Among the surviving documents are roughly 150 previously unpublished essays from the years 1783 to 1787, along with evidence of the order's communication and supervision systems. These records make it possible to see the Illuminati not simply through the writings of its famous leaders, but through the intellectual life of local groups, what members discussed, what they reported, and how they were instructed. The more researchers reconstruct that final phase, the less accurate the simple sentence, "The Illuminati were abolished in 1785, becomes. A better sentence is this: "The Illuminati were smashed in Bavaria in 1785, but parts of the network continued elsewhere, especially in Thuringia, until 1787. That may sound like a small correction. It changes the emotional shape of the story, because in 1787, while the last known Illuminati center was still functioning, Bode traveled to France, Paris, 2 years before the French Revolution. This journey later became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the conspiracy theory that the Illuminati had secretly engineered the fall of the French monarchy. And unlike many famous Illuminati stories, the journey actually happened. Bode left Weimar in May 1787. His travel diary survives. He traveled through Strasbourg and then to Paris, moving through Masonic and intellectual circles and meeting members of the Philolith, a Masonic group interested in questions of ritual, philosophy, esotericism, and the origins of Freemasonry. The timing could hardly have been more useful to anyone looking for a hidden cause of the revolution. A senior figure from a secret German organization travels to Paris. He meets French Masons. The organization is already under government suspicion. 2 years later, the Bastille falls. Placed in that order, the sequence feels almost designed to provoke suspicion. But chronology is not causation. The current Gotha research is quite specific on this point. Bode appears to have won only a small number of French Freemasons to the Illuminati project. The surviving evidence does not show him creating a revolutionary command structure, issuing plans for the overthrow of Louis XVI, or directing the political organizations that would later dominate revolutionary France. His diary also gives us a much stranger and more human picture of the journey than the later legend. Bode was fascinated by the intellectual and esoteric arguments circulating through late 18th century Europe. He encountered discussions of animal magnetism and mystical masonry, and he often positioned himself against what he considered superstition. To later readers, a secret Illuminati organizer visiting Paris sounds like a political mission by definition. To Bode, the trip also belonged to a world of competing systems of knowledge, Masonic reform, philosophy, and arguments about what counted as rational enlightenment. That difference matters. It reminds us that the people inside history do not know which events later generations will select as clues. Bode did not travel beneath a caption reading 2 years before the French Revolution. That caption was added afterward. Once it was added, however, every meeting in Paris could be reread as preparation for 1789. The trip matters historically. It does not carry the weight later conspiracy writers placed on it, and that gap between what happened and what people later believed had happened is where the modern Illuminati truly begins. The French Revolution erupted in 1789 for reasons that historians have examined in enormous detail: fiscal crisis, political conflict, social inequality, food prices, institutional paralysis, Enlightenment political thought, the failure of royal reform, and the escalating dynamics of the revolution itself. Those explanations are complex. They involve millions of people, competing interests, economic pressure, political mistakes, and events that changed direction repeatedly. A hidden society offered something far simpler: one cause, one network, one plan. As the revolution became more violent and Europe entered years of war, the idea that such disorder could have emerged from a secret design became emotionally attractive to people who saw the old political and religious order collapsing around them. By the 1790s, writers were beginning to connect the Illuminati with revolutionary conspiracy. In 1797, two works became especially influential. The Scottish professor John Robison published Proofs of a Conspiracy. Around the same period, the former Jesuit Augustin Barruel published his sweeping account of the forces he believed had secretly prepared the French Revolution. Both made the Illuminati central to a much larger plot against religion and monarchy. Their argument had a powerful advantage. The Illuminati were not imaginary. Robison and Barruel could point to a real order, a real founder, real secrecy, real infiltration into Masonic circles, real anti-clerical thought, real government bans, real confiscated documents, real pseudonyms, real members in positions of influence, a real trip to Paris shortly before the revolution. That collection of facts gave the conspiracy a surface of historical credibility. Then came the leap. A society that wanted to influence educated elites became a society controlling Europe. A network that recruited some Freemasons became the hidden director of Freemasonry. A trip to Paris became preparation for revolution. The collapse of monarchy became evidence of a plan conceived years earlier in secret rooms. The theory did not need every link to be documented because the existence of genuine links made the undocumented parts feel plausible. This is one of the most important things to understand about the Illuminati story. The most durable conspiracy theories are often not constructed entirely from falsehood. They attach themselves to real fragments and then extend beyond what those fragments can support. The historical Illuminati are almost perfectly designed for that process. They really did use secrecy. They really did care about influence. They really did recruit people with social and institutional access. They really were discovered by a government that feared subversion. And parts of their network really did remain active after the first ban. But the surviving record does not show an uninterrupted organization directing the French Revolution or continuing as a global command structure into the 19th, 20th, or 21st centuries. The closer historians get to the actual documents, the more limited the order becomes geographically and chronologically. Yet the myth moves in the opposite direction. The less visible the real organization became, the larger the imagined organization grew. By 1798, fear of the Illuminati had crossed the Atlantic. In New England, the Congregational minister and geographer Jedediah Morse began warning American audiences that the same hidden forces blamed for European revolution might be operating in the United States. His sermons helped trigger what historians now describe as an American Illuminati scare. This episode produced another historical detail that is frequently removed from its context. George Washington himself exchanged letters about the Illuminati. That fact is real, but the correspondence is much more interesting when read completely. In September 1798, Washington told Reverend G. W. Snyder that he had heard of the alleged dangerous plans and doctrines of the Illuminati, but also said he did not believe American Masonic lodges as organizations had been contaminated by those principles. In a later letter, Washington clarified that he believed ideas associated with Illuminism and Jacobinism had spread in the United States, while still distinguishing the spread of ideas from the claim that Masonic lodges themselves had become Illuminati institutions. That distinction is rarely preserved in the modern screenshot version of history. A letter becomes a sentence becomes a confession becomes evidence that the first president of the United States knew a hidden order had taken control of the country. The actual documents say something narrower and more historically understandable. Washington was living in an era of intense fear about revolutionary ideology, foreign influence, faction, and political instability. And he was corresponding with men who were reading Robeson's book while Europe was at war. Within a few years, the immediate American panic faded. The name did not. This may be the first genuinely strange thing about what happened after the Illuminati. Most failed organizations become obscure. The Illuminati became a reusable explanation. A secret society normally depends on continuity. Leaders, money, meetings, membership, rules, communication, and institutional memory. The Illuminati legend discovered that it needed none of those things. Once the historical order disappeared, the name could be detached from the organization and attached to almost any suspected elite network. That is an extraordinary transformation. The real Illuminati had a founder. The imagined Illuminati did not need one. The real Illuminati had geography. The imagined Illuminati could be everywhere. The real Illuminati had membership disputes and organizational problems. The imagined Illuminati could never suffer internal collapse because every collapse could be reinterpreted as deeper concealment. The real Illuminati left documents. The imagined Illuminati became most convincing when documents were absent. In other words, the historical order and the modern myth operate according to almost opposite rules, and yet they share the same name. There is another part of the aftermath that deserves more attention because, at first glance, it seems much more suspicious than it actually is. Former Illuminati did not disappear when the organization did. They continued living ordinary and sometimes highly influential lives. The clearest example is Maximilian von Montgelas. Montgelas had served in the Bavarian administration and had been connected to the Illuminati. His membership damaged his career after the order was exposed. He left Bavarian service and moved into the orbit of the rulers of Palatinato-Zweibrücken. Then history turned. Karl Theodor died in 1799. His successor, Maximilian IV Joseph, brought Montgelas back to Bavaria and made him his leading minister. The same state that had treated Illuminati membership as dangerous now placed a former Illuminati member near the center of power. The reversal went beyond one man. Ludwig Maximilian University notes that the change of government in 1799 brought the rehabilitation of a number of former Illuminati, with some later returning to academic positions. That is exactly the kind of fact that can look like organizational resurrection when viewed from a distance. But political regimes regularly reverse the personnel decisions of their predecessors. A new ruler can restore people who were punished under an old ruler without restoring the secret society to which some of them once belonged. This is one of the places where the Illuminati story rewards patience. The suspicious-looking fact survives fact-checking. Former members really did return. What changes is the conclusion. The return demonstrates that the social and professional lives of members outlasted the ban. It does not, by itself, demonstrate that an Illuminati command structure returned with them. Under Montgelas, Bavaria underwent profound reforms. Administration was reorganized. The state became more centralized. Religious and legal structures changed. Secularization transformed the relationship between government and church property. A new constitution arrived in 1808. Bavaria moved from an old territorial order toward a more modern centralized state. If you want to build a conspiracy story, this is almost irresistible. A secret order says educated men should enter key positions in the state. The order is banned. A former member returns. He becomes chief minister. He helps remake the state. Presented without context, the conclusion seems obvious. But the historical evidence becomes more complicated the moment we ask whether Montgelas was carrying out an Illuminati program. Modern German biographical scholarship specifically warns against that interpretation. Montgelas was a man of the broader Enlightenment. His political thinking developed through French ideas, Bavarian administrative traditions, the experience of the French Revolution, and the reform models spreading across Europe. The Illuminati did not possess a detailed governmental program that can simply be placed beside Montgelas's later reforms and matched line by line. The overlap is real. The causal chain is not established, and this is exactly the kind of residual ambiguity that makes the Illuminati so difficult to discuss well. Former members carried ideas, friendships, habits, ambitions, and professional relationships into later life. That is normal for any network. It would be strange if joining the Illuminati had erased everything else about them, and equally strange if leaving the order had erased every relationship they formed inside it. But a surviving social network is not the same thing as a surviving secret government. This distinction gives us a useful way to think about what survival actually means. An organization can die while its members survive. A hierarchy can die while friendships survive. A code system can die while political ideas survive. A central leadership can die while former members continue helping one another. A secret society can die while outsiders keep using its name. When people ask whether the Illuminati survived, these separate forms of continuity are often compressed into one question. That makes the answer seem more mysterious than it needs to be. Did individual Illuminati survive 1787? Of course. Did some remain influential? Yes. Did Enlightenment ideas associated with members continue spreading? Certainly. Did former members remain connected socially and professionally? In some cases, almost certainly. And the surviving correspondence helps historians trace such networks. Did the Bavarian Illuminati continue as an identifiable, centrally directed organization with an uninterrupted chain of command into the modern era? That is where the evidence stops. The latest Gotha research actually makes this boundary clearer, not weaker. It extends the known life of the order beyond 1785, but it also places that extension inside a specific geography, specific leadership, specific documents, and a specific endpoint. The final stronghold can be studied. Its meetings can be reconstructed. Its writings can be catalogued. Its people can be identified. That is very different from saying the organization became invisible and therefore impossible to trace. History becomes more interesting when the evidence narrows the mystery rather than inflating it. There is one final piece of the popular image that shows how far the modern Illuminati drifted from the historical one: the eye above the pyramid. Today, it may be the most recognizable Illuminati symbol in the world. It appears in videos, posters, tattoos, album art, memes, conspiracy documentaries, and endless photographs of the back of the American $1 bill. But the Eye of Providence was not the defining emblem of Weishaupt's order. The symbol existed in European religious art long before the Illuminati. In the United States, the unfinished pyramid and Eye of Providence were incorporated into the reverse of the Great Seal in 1782. The surviving official explanation describes the pyramid in terms of strength and duration, and the eye as an image of Providence watching over the American cause. The reverse of the Great Seal did not even appear on the dollar bill until 1935. In other words, the most famous visual evidence for the modern Illuminati is not historical evidence for the Bavarian Illuminati at all. That should weaken the myth. Instead, it rarely does. Why? Because by the 20th century, the Illuminati no longer depended on the history of Adam Weishaupt's organization. The name had become a cultural container for a much broader fear that visible institutions are less important than invisible networks, that public explanations conceal private decisions, and that important events are coordinated by people whose names never appear on the ballot, contract, or official report. Sometimes that general intuition is reasonable. Power does operate through private meetings, elite networks, lobbying, intelligence services, corporate boards, political donors, family connections, professional relationships, and informal influence. Real conspiracies have existed throughout history. But that does not make every network the Illuminati. The name became useful precisely because it was vague enough to connect unrelated forms of power into a single story. And once that happened, almost any evidence could be absorbed. If two powerful people knew each other, that was a connection. If they did not appear connected, that was secrecy. If a symbol appeared repeatedly, that was a signal. If no symbol appeared, that was discipline. If documents existed, they proved organization. If documents did not exist, they proved concealment. A theory that can explain both the presence and absence of evidence becomes very difficult to test. That is one reason the historical Illuminati are so valuable. They give us something the modern myth usually does not: boundaries. We can identify Adam Weishaupt. We can read his writings. We can follow his conflict with Nigga. We can trace members through letters and records. We can see the Bavarian decrees. We can examine the confiscated papers. We can follow Bode to Paris. We can study the Gotha material. We can watch the order continue after the Bavarian ban. And then, at some point, the documentary trail of the organization ends. That ending is not as clean as historians once believed, but it is still an ending. The harder mystery begins afterward, not where did the hidden headquarters move? There is no reliable evidence that it did. The harder mystery is how a dead organization became a living idea. The answer seems to begin with the unusual way the order was destroyed. It was not simply forgotten. It was exposed. Its enemies printed its papers. Former members wrote defenses. Critics wrote accusations. A revolution then erupted nearby, giving those accusations a historical event large enough to attach themselves to. Political fear carried the story across borders. Clergy repeated it from pulpits. Writers placed it inside larger theories of hidden revolution. Later generations inherited not the order, but the narrative structure. A secret society infiltrates respectable institutions. Its members hide behind ordinary identities. They place allies in positions of influence. The public notices only after the consequences appear. If the organization is exposed, that merely proves how advanced it had become. If it disappears, that proves it has learned to hide better. That structure can survive indefinitely because it does not require the original people. In this sense, the Illuminati may have achieved a form of immortality that Weishaupt never planned. Not institutional immortality, narrative immortality. The order became a story people could reuse whenever history felt too complicated, power felt too distant, or social change seemed too coordinated to be accidental. And there is a final irony here. Weishaupt believed that education could reshape people. He built an organization that used layers of knowledge, selective revelation, coded identity, and careful control of information. Members at lower levels did not necessarily see what those above them saw. Advancement changed the meaning of what came before. The modern Illuminati myth works in a strangely similar psychological way. The believer is told that ordinary appearances are incomplete. Another layer exists. Then another. A symbol gains a second meaning. A historical event gains a hidden cause. A public institution gains a private master. Each new piece promises access to a deeper level of reality. That similarity does not prove the order survived, but it may help explain why the idea survived so well. The mythology reproduces the feeling of initiation even when the organization that once practiced initiation is gone. And now, with the rediscovered material in Gotha still being studied, the historical story is becoming more detailed. At exactly the moment the mythical story seems impossible to contain. The latest research gives us something rare in a subject buried under centuries of speculation, a genuinely new development that does not require exaggeration. The Illuminati did survive longer than the simplified version of history said they did. Their last known center operated in Thuringia after the Bavarian Suppression. Bode remained active. Internal intellectual work continued. The order's communications and support structures can be reconstructed from documents that researchers only recovered in modern times. And Bode really did go to Paris in 1787. Those facts are enough to make the story fascinating. They are not enough to prove the larger legend. In fact, the same research that extends the order's life also gives us a clearer view of its limits. The final network was still a human organization. It needed meetings. It needed correspondence. It needed people like Bode. It left paper behind. It experienced disagreement. It depended on political protection. And eventually, its activities stopped. That is not what an all-powerful hidden government looks like. It is what a secret society under pressure looks like. There is a temptation when discussing the Illuminati to choose between two extreme stories. One says the entire subject is nonsense. There was never anything there, and anyone who finds the history interesting has already been fooled. The other says the historical order was merely the visible beginning of a global organization that still controls events today. The documents support neither extreme. There was something there, something organized, secretive, ambitious, politically sensitive, and significant enough to frighten a government. It recruited real officials and intellectuals. It attempted to expand through existing networks. It survived the first phase of suppression longer than many histories recognized. Some former members later became influential. Its final organizers had connections beyond Bavaria. Its papers created a political scandal that outlived the organization itself. All of that is real, but the evidence also shows fragmentation, internal conflict, geographic limits, failed ambitions, hostile surveillance, public exposure, and eventual organizational collapse. The French Revolution does not require Illuminati command to explain it. The eye on the dollar is not an Illuminati signature. Washington's letters are not confirmation of an Illuminati takeover of America. Montgelas's later reforms are not documented as the execution of secret orders from Weishaupt, and the archival trail does not provide an unbroken bridge from Gotha in 1787 to the imagined world government of today. The strongest version of this mystery is therefore quieter than the popular one. It asks what remains after we remove the claims that the evidence cannot support. What remains is a strange sequence. In 1776, a professor builds a secret educational order. Within a few years, it reaches into aristocratic, bureaucratic, Masonic, and intellectual networks. Its own leaders begin fighting. A government bans it. Its founder flees. Authorities raid members and publish their private papers. Instead of disappearing immediately, the organization shifts its center and continues outside Bavaria. One of its most important remaining organizers travels to Paris in 1787. And the last known activity then fades. 2 years later, France enters revolution. Within a decade, writers across Europe are claiming the vanished society caused it. Within another year, ministers in the United States are warning that the same force may have crossed the Atlantic. Then, in 1799, a former Illuminati member rises to the center of government in the very Bavaria where the order had been suppressed. Decades pass. The organization remains absent. The story remains alive. Centuries later, the name is more famous than almost every real member, except perhaps Goethe. And in the late 20th century, an archive thought lost returns, allowing historians to discover that the order's ending had been misdated in popular memory all along. That does not sound like proof of a master conspiracy. It sounds like something more historically unusual. A conspiracy that ended, followed by a conspiracy theory that did not. If you have been listening for evidence that the modern Illuminati are literally the same organization Adam Weishaupt founded, the documents do not get us there. But if you have been listening for the point where history becomes legend, the boundary is much harder to locate. Was it 1785 when Bavaria banned the order? Apparently not. Was it 1787 when the final Gotha activity stopped? Organizationally, that is now much closer to what current research suggests. But socially, former members remained. Politically, Enlightenment networks remained. Culturally, the confiscated documents remained. And narratively, the Illuminati were only beginning. That may be the reason this story continues to feel unresolved, even after the most extravagant claims are removed. We want organizations to have clean endings. A company closes, an army surrenders, a government falls, a society is banned. But networks do not end as cleanly as institutions. Ideas do not obey police decrees. Friendships do not dissolve because a membership list is illegal. Books keep circulating, accusations survive their original targets, and a name can become more powerful after the people who created it no longer control what it means. So perhaps the final question is not whether the Illuminati secretly survived every century after 1787. There is no good evidence for that. The more interesting question is what exactly survived when the order itself did not. Was it simply a collection of Enlightenment ideas that would have spread anyway? Was it a loose network of former members whose later careers created the appearance of continuity? Was it the publication of the Order's own secret documents, giving future generations a permanent archive from which new suspicions could be built? Was it the coincidence of Bode's Paris journey and the revolution 2 years later? Or was the most durable survivor something less tangible? A model of hidden power that people could apply again and again to events the original Illuminati never lived to see. The research from Gotha gives us a useful warning. For a long time, even serious accounts treated 1785 as a simple ending. The documents now show that the reality was messier. The order continued in another place, under different leadership, for longer than many people realized. That means skepticism should work in both directions. We should be skeptical of claims that transform every unexplained connection into proof of a centuries-long cabal. But we should also be skeptical of overly neat historical summaries that close a file before every surviving document has been examined. There is still archival work being done on the Illuminati. Researchers are still cataloging material. The Swedish Chest has not always been fully integrated into popular accounts. The final years of the order are clearer than they once were, but they are also a reminder that even one of the most discussed secret societies in history can still produce genuine historical surprises, and that may be the most fitting ending possible. The real Illuminati were not the organization modern mythology says they were, but they were also not quite the organization the simplified textbook ending told us they were. They existed. They organized in secret. They wanted influence. They were banned. They survived the ban for a time. They left behind people, documents, relationships, enemies, and a story powerful enough to detach itself from the facts that created it. Then the organization disappeared, and somehow that was when the Illuminati became impossible to get rid of. If you had to draw the line yourself, where would you place it? In 1785, when Bavaria outlawed the order? In 1787, when its last known stronghold went quiet? Or later, when former members returned to public life, but the organization itself could no longer be found? And if a secret society can disappear while its network, its ideas, and its reputation continue separately, what does it really mean to say that it ended? That is the part of the Illuminati story that still does not fit neatly into a single explanation.